If you've been on the job hunt lately, you might notice a new trend in online employment listings. Once you scroll past the requirements for 3 to 5 years of experience or proficiency in Excel, you might see an actual salary range for the job.
That's right. Thanks to a wave of pay transparency laws sweeping state legislatures, more states are requiring employers to disclose salary ranges to would-be workers.
Which could be great for you. I mean, who wants to go through the process of optimizing a cover letter for AI screening tools, taking a written skills test, and acing 3 rounds of interviews, only to find out that the pay isn't remotely what you expected?
But does writing a salary range into a job description impact how much you actually take home?
This is definitely going to be an interesting topic. I think this is certainly a challenge as somebody who both is an employee and also manages other folks. There's always a balance of how much you pay an individual. Obviously, as an employee, generally speaking, most people want to get paid as much as humanly possible. Like they want as much as they can get. And there's also a downside to this, which is, well, if you actually deserve to get paid more than other folks, then maybe that's great for you, but maybe those other folks might not be as happy about it. Maybe there's other criteria that goes into it, like the market or other economic factors that are adjusting why somebody's salary is different from one another. Maybe tenure at the company could adjust it. But then there's also the flip side of there's negotiations, there's maybe asking for too much money, which could actually put you at risk. I know layoffs are a topic that I discuss with folks on a fairly regular basis. And if you get paid more, it puts a bigger target on your back. And so there's definitely a lot of nuance to what your salary is. And well, I think most people go about thinking more the better. And I think for most people in America, that is probably true considering inflation and how things are going right now. But it is something that you should be mindful of as you go out and seek for your role and actually negotiate, is think about, why is your salary this number? Does that imply particular risk with this role? Does that imply stability at this role? And so those things might be priced in for one reason or another.
In 2021, Colorado became the first state to enact a law requiring employers to disclose compensation in all job postings and notices, both internal and public, meaning every role posted to an online job board or even circulated among existing employees had to include a realistic salary range.
The goal of this law was to...
This is nice. I would say I should add a bunch of caveats at the beginning. But I do like being able to see salaries myself when I look at job ranges, and they can be informative. However, most of the job ranges that I see are like usually huge. There can be such a large range that it's not particularly meaningful, because if they paid you at the bottom of that range, then like you could be underpaid for that role, and maybe just the very top of that range is maybe what you're hoping for.
Prevent pay discrimination by forcing employers to decide how much a particular role was worth before they knew who they would hire. At first, employers balked. Colorado's law took effect at a time when...
That is actually a good rationale for it, which is thinking about the salary for that job before you have the person in mind. That presumably would reduce bias. I don't know if that's a new concept. I'm not sure how this varies company to company, but most of the companies that I've worked at, which are generally larger companies, usually there is a target range already baked in before you even create the hire. Like even before the opening exists, there's already ranges for particular positions and particular roles. And so you just say, hey, I would like an opening of this type. And they'll say, okay, here is the range for that role. Go hire somebody within that range. So that's at least been true basically at every company I've ever worked at. But that could be less true in certain segments of the workforce or particular size of companies.
Many companies were newly open to recruiting remote talent, but some employers advertised roles that were eligible to be performed anywhere in the country, except Colorado, to avoid having to include salary information. That loophole didn't last long, though. Over the next 4 years, 13 more states and Washington, D.C. have followed suit, passing their own pay transparency laws.
After laws take effect in New Jersey, Illinois, Vermont, Massachusetts, and Minnesota in 2025, PayScale estimates that 1 in 3 workers in the US will be covered by transparency laws. So what changes can workers expect to see when these laws take effect? For one, salary could become less tied to an individual's negotiating power. The recruitment process can feel like a game of chicken, where both the applicant and the employer want the other person to say a number first.
Yeah, this is a silly thing that does actually happen in negotiations. I feel like it is definitely unnecessary, but yeah, this is classic. Whether you're, for myself being on both sides, this is a very classic technique. Usually, like every recruiter I've ever worked with, they will try to get a number out of somebody as soon as possible. But it does make it hard for actually deciding what is a fair number. And this certainly biases towards underpaying people who are in tough situations, which doesn't necessarily equate to their performance or their ability. And so that could be like, maybe you were recently laid off and you need to support your family, or, you know, maybe you're not a US citizen and you have a working visa of some type and you don't really have any other options, or any number of reasons that could exist for you wanting to find a job could make you more vulnerable to not wanting to negotiate or not negotiate that strongly. And that could impact your final pay by quite a bit, even though those factors have nothing to do with your actual qualifications, skill, or ability to do the job.
But when employers have to disclose a pay range, it can protect applicants from asking for a number that's way too low, which can stunt their earning power over the course of their entire career. Negotiation can also backfire for women and people of color who are less likely to receive pay raises even when they ask for them.
The National Women's Law Center identifies wage transparency as a tool to close the gender wage gap because it makes negotiation a much smaller part of determining salaries, and it keeps employers accountable.
Yeah, so I don't know if they're going to explain this soon, but one of the reasons why that is likely the case is men, while this will be a generalization, it doesn't mean every man is like this or every woman is like this. I think generally speaking, for recruitment purposes, generally you see that men are more likely to apply for jobs when the criteria for that job doesn't necessarily 100% match up with their skill set or their resume. And so this isn't saying that they're going to just apply and pretend that they can do a job that they can't, but maybe they'll say, you know what, I have 70% or 80% of the qualifications and requirements here, so I'm going to apply for this job, versus women are more likely to aim for a higher percentage of those criteria, maybe like 90 or 100% of the criteria before they apply. And also men are more likely to negotiate statistically than women are for salary. And so this means that if you just took that as an average, men are more likely to apply for jobs that maybe they are slightly more of a stretch role for them. And then they're also more likely to negotiate for that stretch role or the role that they're actually qualified for 100%. And so those differences can also add up, not just necessarily like pure gender discrimination for pay. This could also just be a thing where the process for how people get paid do benefit folks with that mentality versus folks who don't have that mentality.
After all, it's not just applicants who can see the pay ranges for posted positions. Current employees can also compare what they make to the salary bands on advertised roles and use.
That's a good point. But I think that's pretty unlikely for an employee to get paid less than something that's within the range. Again, maybe I've just been blessed with the work that I've had. But for the most part, again, at larger companies, usually they are on top of the bands. And even if somebody's out of band, usually they'll make them within the band within the next pay raise cycle. And so usually you'd have to be at a pretty weird, really bad company with very bad management for that to be the case, where like you could just have less than what is supposed to be for your role. And so I haven't experienced this as much, and I haven't seen this as much. I can see folks who would just barely make it under these numbers, but then they'll get adjusted automatically as part of the process. Usually there's this is done for legal purposes, etc. And so I would expect most large companies this would be true for.
Use that information next time they ask for a raise.
On the downside, if you were a stellar negotiator before transparency laws, that talent might not get you so far now. A 2022 analysis of Chinese companies found that transparency can compress wages toward the median. That could be good if you were getting underpaid, but not so fun if you're usually on the higher end of the pay ranges. These researchers noted that employers might be hesitant to court superstar applicants with exceptional pay for fear that other employees will expect to get bumped up to their pay level. So, pay transparency could be a step in the right direction for some workers seeking fairer pay, but how does this all shake out for employers?
Well, they could definitely experience some growing pains as they shift to more transparent pay. It takes a lot of effort on the front end to evaluate compensation practices and set salary bands that are based on something more objective than how much the applicant sitting in front of you is asking for. And if that evaluation reveals that there are wage gaps within your company, that's a quick way to tank morale. But on the upside, transparency can help attract new talent. The job posting site Indeed reports that companies that include a pay range in listings received 3 times more applications than those that didn't include pay information.
And if you don't live in a state where your employer is required to be transparent about pay, that doesn't mean that you can't be. As we discussed in our episode about unions, most private sector employees in the US are protected by the National Labor Relations Act of 1935, which allows workers to take collective action for issues that impact them at work, whether those workers are in a union or not.
And one of those protected actions is discussing pay with your coworkers. Private employers covered by the NLRA can't retaliate against employees who discuss their pay, though they might be able to stop you from discussing it on employer-provided communication channels or devices. So it may be best to take that conversation outside the company Slack chat.
Having these tough conversations with your coworkers may expose pay disparities. Maybe you find out you make way less or way more than someone with a similar role, or even someone with less experience than you. Still, you can use that information to find out what your role is worth and negotiate for a raise, or know what to ask for next time you go on the job hunt.
Most of these laws haven't been in place long enough for us to know about their long-term effects, but it's likely that a salary range in job postings alone won't be enough to end wage gaps for good.
That's why Colorado's law only included pay transparency in job postings as one piece of the puzzle. Their Equal Pay for Equal Work Act also reinforces employees' right to discuss pay without retaliation from their employers, requires employers to keep records of wages and job descriptions, and asks employers to be more transparent about how current employees can advance internally within their companies.
With all these pieces working together, Colorado reports that in the 4 years since their law took effect, their gender wage gap has closed slightly. Women earned an average of 78 cents on the dollar compared to similarly qualified men in 2021. But by 2024, that number had risen to 85 cents on the dollar.
Wow, that's actually pretty good progress that they've made in just a few years.
The idea is that more transparency at every step of employment could serve to make things fairer for employees, from filling out an application to working your way up the corporate ladder.
These new pay transparency laws are a first step that can reveal a lot of information about wage disparities. But then it's up to lawmakers, employers, and employees to work together to act on it.
And that's our 2 cents.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I will see you around.